So there might have been a little confusion with us not being able to meet Wednesday night as far as to which lesson we would be going over today. So John 17 we just finished in the first hour with catch up for the lesson, and then 18 kept us on track. So probably what we'll do today is mostly read through John 18, pretty much all that, just to make sure if everybody had an opportunity to be prepared for the same lesson with us somewhat being off track a little bit with the weather. So John 18, verse 1. And when Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of Kidron, where there was a garden, in which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Judas then having received the Roman cohort, and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees came there with the lanterns and torches and weapons. So Jesus, knowing all the things which were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" And they answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." And he said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered and told them, "I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way." To fulfill the word which he spoke, "Of those whom you have given me, I have lost no one." So as we finish the prayer in John 17, what time of day is it at this point in time in the lesson? Chris, you're in the wrong spot. Nighttime. It's nighttime, right? So it is night, okay, as this prayer has been happening, and now they've crossed over this ravine to the Mount of Olives. How did Judas know where to find Jesus? How do you know where he would be?
He met there often with his apostles.
Okay, this was a common place they would meet. So Judas had an idea. You think about nighttime. At this time, there wouldn't have been street lights. There wouldn't have been, different things at night where we can function at night. It'd be a little different back then, right? So how would they have found Jesus? How would they have known where to go? Well, Judas had some inside knowledge as to where to go get him. Who was with Judas as he's coming? There's a couple parties there with him.
His servants and officers of the Jews.
Okay, officers of the Jews. We see the officers of the chief priests and the Pharisees, and then who else? Who else came? Was it just the Jews that come to get him?
Soldiers.
It was the Romans, right? So the Romans, they were together, right? You had a mixed group coming to get Jesus at this time. Verse 6. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. So Judy and I were talking about this, and it's one of those things you read in your Bible, and you've read this 1,000 times, and then you read it when you're teaching the class, and you go, "What does that mean? What does it mean they fell back and fell to the ground?" Anybody do any research on that as to what happened there? I know the author gave some ideas as possibly there. Anybody have anything they looked at that and said, "No, I haven't read that before," that when they came, what did that mean? They fell backwards to the ground. You got an idea?
I think it's a reaction to divine revelation and Christ's power. You oftentimes read in Scripture, specifically the Old Testament, of when something of glory is revealed, the person typically either falls on their face or falls down.
Okay. Anybody else? Larry?
I sort of thought, for one thing, it shows Jesus' power, and he allowed himself to be taken. It wasn't like they overpowered him. He allowed himself to die on the cross, to be arrested, to go through a trial. doing God's will, and that he certainly had like he said, he could have called 10 legions of angels.
Okay.
You know, he had power to prevent it, but he chose not to.
Anybody else? And we just finished in John 17, verse 1. And it says, Jesus spoke these things, and lifting up his eyes to heaven, he said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you. Could they have arrested and captured Jesus if it wasn't his time? They wouldn't have been able to, would they? And here's just a slight bit of his power shown in this. And then when he said, I am he, they're on the ground, right? So he had to allow himself to be arrested. They wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't his time.
I think, it says that they came with lanterns, torches, and weapons. I mean, they're anticipating a fight that they probably never dreamed that they would have, because it's not like they're denying the miracles are happening. I mean, they're claiming that it's from Satan and whatever, but in chapter 7, these same people that would be about this group in chapter 18 didn't go and get him like they were told, and they said, no man has ever spoke like this guy. And so, I mean, tension's high, and when he says, yeah, me, you can imagine the kind of recoil that would cause them to have because of what they know he could do if he wanted to, and maybe anticipate him doing.
Okay. In verse 8, what does Jesus do for those that are with him? He makes sure they're safe, right? He makes sure they're safe. So you're coming for me, fine, here I am. Let these go. All right. Verses 10 and 11. Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it? If we turn back to, let's see, John 13. John 13, 36 and 37. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered, where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me later. And Peter said, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. When we read this, we see Peter's faith, and we understand some of Peter's background and some of his personality, I guess you might say, with how he addressed things. So when push come to shove, Peter was ready. He pulled his sword out. He was ready to fight. Right? And you don't typically aim with your sword to cut someone's ear off, most likely who's aiming for a head, right, and got the ear. So we know Peter was ready to fight. He was ready to lay down his life, and we'll follow that up a little later. But what does Jesus tell him? Yeah. Well, you're going to try to stop God? It's my time. Right? Okay.
It's always been a fascinating subject to me, is the faith of Peter. There's several times where Peter and Jesus have had many conflicts because of Peter's zeal. When Jesus began to plainly tell them about his death, and Peter arguing with him, no, that's not going to happen. And Jesus having to call him Satan and tell him his mind is set on the wrong things. This is the same Peter that, if we would have kept reading in chapter 13, that is going to be denying Christ very shortly. misguided or our faith is based upon an untruth, it could create an action that is contrary to God. And, while Peter believed that Jesus was going to be the physical king, and this was the time that they were going to establish the physical kingdom, I think that's why he was going to fight. And Christ allowed himself to be taken and beaten and falsely accused. It rocked Peter's world. And I think that's where the denial came in, because this is not what's supposed to be happening.
And we saw it with all the apostles, and we've seen that throughout this. The full comprehension of what was actually happening wasn't there, right? It was, they were looking for that physical kingdom. They were looking for that ruler. And Peter manifested his faith in this way, his misguided faith, we could say, right? Because it wasn't according to the truth that Jesus had told him, and they just didn't get it. But he manifested that in being ready to fight. Also in, let's see, John 11, verse 6. John 11 is back when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Actually 16, sorry. John 11:16. And Thomas, who was called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Right? So this is the point where he's saying, "I'm going back." And they're like, "Don't go back. They want to kill you." And he's like, "Come on, let's go. We'll all die together." So there was a lot of faith in this group of men. But at the same time, when Jesus is arrested, they're all scattered. And they all leave him. We can see that in, we don't see it in John's account, but if we go to Mark 14, in verse 50. Back up, 49. And every day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. This is Jesus talking to them as they come to arrest him. But this has taken place to fulfill scriptures, and they all left him and fled. Right? So now Jesus is alone in this reading at this point. Any comments up through verse 11 so far? Anything anybody had wanted to bring out that maybe I passed over, or anything as we continue on? All right, let's keep going. We will read 12 through 14. So the Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and led him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of all the people. That happened a couple chapters earlier. Continuing on, Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, Are you not also one of this man's disciples? And he said, I am not. And now the slaves and officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. So who was following Jesus after his arrest? There's Peter and the other disciple, who is John. Yes. I don't know how he would have wrote that. I guess he could have said an I don't know, but it was another disciple. We know that was John. We're following him. John was able to get into the high court because of why?
His family was known to the high priest.
Okay. So there was some familiarity there. There was relation. And in our book, they brought that down through going back to Elizabeth, the the mother of John the Baptist and the family relation there with the priest. So they would have known John, and he was able to get in because they knew him. And then John convinced the doorkeeper to let Peter in as well. So now they're in the court of the high priest. Can somebody read 19 through 24, please?
The high priest had asked Jesus about his disciple and his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always met, where the Jews always meet. In secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. When he said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Okay. So, I think Jesus does a great job of answering the question, right? Yeah, if you want to try me, and you're wanting to do this right, you need a couple witnesses. Go talk to all those people I've been preaching to. They all know me, right? They all know what I've been saying. Go ask them. Well, this isn't what they wanted to do, because what time of day is it? It's still nighttime. Nothing's changed, right? So we're having this trial in the middle of the night. When you try people in the middle of the night, are you trying to do it before the masses so you can get a fair trial? You're not, right? You're trying to do it in secret. Okay. So we're still middle of the night. This trial's going on, and they're trying to pin something on Jesus. He answers the question very fairly. He slapped or struck, and his question is how are you answering the high priest like this? Oh, I'm like, is something on the board? Tyler's like, so we got something streaming? Okay, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Scott can go first.
Also, like, you can defend yourself, like if Christ was to say one, I'm trying to say this the right way. It may sound, when you hear some reason for sometimes why the person is accusing and what they're accusing for, and in this situation, it would sound ridiculous. You know, if you were to go to those people and say, what are you accusing this person of? And when they would tell him, it would sound ridiculous. Oftentimes, that's why Christ oftentimes says, ask them. You know, and then when they have answered before, it just sounds ludicrous on why. And that's why so often, you know, people. But anyway, it would just sound ridiculous for them to answer what you're really trying to try him for, you know.
And we see that not in John's record, but in some of the others, where they're just bringing people as anybody got anything, we can hang on this guy. You know, come on, anybody. And then finally they find a couple and say, well, they tear down the temple, rebuild it, right? Yeah.
Just, I mean, it further highlights not only Jesus' wisdom, but obviously their corruption. Even in our system, we're protected from self-incrimination. You know, the right to keep silent and have an attorney present that knows how things work, and then lawyers and you know, prosecutors and others try to manipulate those things and twist your words, and you know, people are foolish and incriminate themselves all the time, even if they didn't do what they're accused of. And Jesus really shows immense wisdom, but also in the way he answers, incriminates them from, you know, about their own corruption and underhanded dealing. And they've tried to do this throughout his ministry, ask him leading questions to try to trip him up and stuff, and it's never worked. And this is kind of like this is our last ditch effort to get this guy to say something that he'll regret, and he just doesn't give it to him.
So in 23, just rereading that real quick, and Jesus answered him. This is after he said, you're going to speak to the high priest like this. And he said, spoken wrongly, testify the wrong. And if rightly, why do you strike me? What can we learn from this today in our lives? How can we apply this to us ourselves? You got an idea? I can read my brain.
You think you're kind of bulletproof, you have no guilt, no sin out there to hold you accountable for something wrong.
Okay? If they don't have anything that they can find on you, then you would be cleared. Okay? Anybody else have any thoughts on that little section there? What I had written down is when we apply the word, if there's anything that we're trying to study with on somebody, if there's a question on doctrine, if there's something, if we can go to the word, and Jesus is the word, right, then we know what the truth is. And you can't be held accountable for something if it's true. And that's how I looked at that, is if we can apply it as we study or different things. You know, they're saying, you know, if I've spoken wrongly, show me in the Word where I've spoken wrongly, right? If I've spoken of the truth, then how does that truth apply to you? And what are we going to do with it? Now that you've been confronted with the truth, what are you going to do? Doesn't mean everybody's going to convert to the truth, but now we have it, right? So that was something I kind of read and kind of thought about, that, you know, we might be able to apply a little bit of the logic that Jesus used in that response to that question.
And going along with that, he mentions it in the book, but when Jesus tells us to turn the other cheek, he's not saying you can't protect yourself, or you can't, you know, whatever, or you're supposed to just let people hit you and knock you around, but it's about vengeance. You're not to seek vengeance, but you can seek justice within the, you know, system that God has given, which is appealing to the truth. Where's the evidence? But I think that even in this moment, Jesus, as personal as this was, didn't take it personally. He could have flinched at him or, you know, retaliated with words, but all he said was, hey, what am I doing wrong? Tell me what I'm doing wrong. And he's giving it into God's hands ultimately. He's you know, not fighting. He's not seeking vengeance. And as wrong as it is for people to lash out at us and speak evil about us just because we're saying what's true, it never gives us the right to retaliate. It's something we've got to place in God's care.
So I'm going to turn back to John 13, which I just read, with Simon Peter 37 saying, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I'll lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. So then we turn back to John 18, and if someone could read 25 through 27, please.
Simon Peter stood and warned himself there. Jesus said to him, you are not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter then denied him again, and immediately a rooster crowed.
Okay. So we see that fulfillment of the words of Jesus a few chapters earlier. Peter willing to cut off the ear of the slave and fight to the death, and now just minutes later has now denied him 3 times, just like Jesus said. And the rooster crowed. So now what time of day is it?
Breaking down.
Break of dawn, right? So now we're getting early morning. Still, do you know any judges that come down to the courthouse at the break of dawn to do their trials? Still a little early for them, right? So as we still look at this trial of Jesus before the people, it's still not just. It's still not fair, if you want to call it such. And if we have time, we'll see how we do. Maybe we'll come back to the denial of Peter, and we'll do that, but we'll try to get through our chapter and go on from there. So, 28 through 32. Then they led Jesus to Caiaphas into the praetorium from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. So we know the Passover is coming. They can't associate with these Gentiles and be defiled, so they won't go in. So in 29, therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they answered and said, "If he were not an evildoer, he wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have delivered him to you." So we see right there, they didn't answer the question. What accusation? Well, he's evil, and if he wasn't, we wouldn't have brought him. Right? That's not an accusation. So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews said, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." And to fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying of what kind of death he was about to die. So, let's see here. What did Pilate tell them when they said he's an evildoer? What did he tell them to do?
Judge it yourself.
You go try him. You go charge him. This is a Jewish matter, right? It's not a Roman matter. It's a Jewish matter. You go take care of it. What'd they want to do with Jesus? Put him to death. So we really want a trial. We want a fair trial at that. We just want to put him to death and be done. John, we're going to go way back in John 3. John 3 and in verse 14. And it says, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, so that whoever believes will in him have eternal life." And we won't spend a lot of time there, but we know that serpent, people had to believe that the serpent would heal them of their bites, the venom, and in the same way that they would have to believe, and Jesus would be lifted up, right? So there's the foreshadowing, the talk of that coming out. Sorry. John 12 and 32 and 33. "And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." But he was saying this to indicate the kind of death by which he was to die. So what was, if the Jews had been allowed to put someone to death, which they weren't allowed to under Roman law, how would they have done that? They would have stoned him. Okay. How would that have worked with God's plan that Jesus would be lifted up? It wouldn't have worked, right? If he was to be lifted up, he couldn't be stoned. So, could the Jews put him to death? They couldn't, right? It wouldn't have been God's plan. So, who had to put Jesus to death for this to work? The Romans, right? So, for this plan that they're trying to put him to death, and they would love to put him to death, to fulfill God's plan, it had to be the Romans. Because the death would have been the wrong death. It wouldn't have worked with Scripture. Any comments on that? Yeah.
Kind of just an observation and side point. It kind of shows how guilt works as well, because they did not crucify him. They didn't drive the nails in his hands and feet. But in Acts 2, Peter says, "You have taken by lawless hands and have crucified." I believe there he's speaking about the Gentiles who are without the law. They used Gentiles to kill the Son of God. They killed him, but the Gentiles did too. The Romans did too. Any time that there is, for instance, error taught or sin participated in, and we tolerate it, and we might not have a direct connection to it in our activity or our words, but we tolerate it or we just let it go, we become guilty as well in the same sense of letting something that is unlawful happen when we have a responsibility with that opportunity to stand against it and stand for the truth. And so you don't have to take your hand with the knife to slay the Son of God to be guilty of it. They used someone else to do it. And it's the same thing with us. We've got to be sure that we are on the side of truth
Larry?
A good example of what Jeremiah's talking about is when David sent Uriah the Hittite, he put him in the forefront of the battle, and then David was accused of killing him. He just used somebody else to kill him, and was guilty of murder.
Right. Also, the association New Testament would be Saul, right, with the stoning of Stephen. We don't read that Saul was throwing the stones. He was holding the coats. But he was still just as guilty as the one throwing the stones. So when we look at our lives and what we're doing, are we living according to it, or are we trying to play in a gray area like Jeremiah said?
And Romans chapter 1 sums up that exact same sentiment. That we know God's will is right, that the people who are guilty of this list of sins deserve to die. So not only those, but also those who give hearty approval.
So, by the Jews, well, by Judas, betraying Jesus, and the Jews coming to arrest him, the Jews fulfilled the prophecy, basically, right? They were the catalyst to make this prophecy happen, that Jesus would be crucified. And by them fulfilling that prophecy, then we have salvation of our sins through his blood. So the Jews that rejected him are the ones that ultimately provided us the Savior today. Let's see. All right, 33 through 38. Can I have someone read that one, please?
Then Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus, said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" What verse through?
Through 38.
And Pilate answered him, "I a Jew, your own nation and chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, for this cause I come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all."
Okay. So we see Pilate wanting to question Jesus, right? So at this point, what does he know? That the Jews are upset. They brought him here. He's an evildoer, and they want to put him to death. And Pilate's like, okay, well, let me figure out what's going on here, right? So what do you think was Pilate's main objective in his questioning of Jesus? What's the one thing he wanted to find out?
I think he's trying to save his own skin the whole time. If he actually is a political figure and claims to be king over Caesar, then I need to deal with this. And if it's just some spiritual thing, then who cares? I don't think he's seeking justice truly. He's kind of a bad guy when it comes down to it. Seems very selfish what he's doing.
And that was my answer, is he need to find out this guy's trying to overthrow Rome or put himself above Rome. That would be Pilate's main prerogative in all this, right? That's his job, is to make sure those things are taken care of. And at the end of that, we read, he says in 38, I find no guilt in him, right? So there's nothing as far as Roman law that I got a problem with this guy. Now, there's probably a lot of things about him I don't understand, and we know Pilate had some understanding of Jesus a little bit. This wasn't the first time he'd ever heard of him or anything else. But that would have been his primary goal, is he going to be a threat to Rome as he is why he's being brought forth. So he asked, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus' answer is, "Are you saying this on your own initiative? What do you know? What have you heard about me? Or are you saying this because other people said something?" Right? And I think that's interesting because we do know there's some history there that Pilate knows a little bit about Jesus. And Pilate answers back, kind of to Jeremiah's point, if it's a religious thing, I really don't care one way or the other. I have no part in your Jewish beliefs or anything else. But he says, I'm not a Jew. Are you king of Jews? I'm not a Jew. They're the ones that brought you here. What's going on? What are you? And then Jesus says, I am. I am king of the Jews. But don't worry. We're not here to overthrow Rome. If we were here to fight, we could fight, but I'm not fighting. I don't have angels coming to fight. I don't know how Peter put his sword up. If Peter was the only one willing to take it out, Peter's put his sword back up, right? So I'm not coming to in that way. Yeah. Good call saying, hey, Nevin, because I doubt I saw you. Go ahead.
That's why I said it. I mean, it's in passing. Am I king of the Jews? He doesn't actually say he's king of the Jews. He sort of segregates himself from the Jews in his response. He says, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting to prevent him from being delivered to the Jews. And I think it's subtle, but it's important to recognize that Jesus' kingdom is not made of a physical, genealogical people. It's all who believe.
Yeah, it's 36. My kingdom is not of this realm. Right? We're not even, I'm talking about things you don't even understand, Pilate. Right? We're not talking about this earth. That would have been very much his focus. And then the end here, 39 and 40. But you have a custom, so I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish that I release for you the king of the Jews? And they cried out again, saying, no, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. So, a couple things to keep in mind as we finish chapter 18. And obviously, John doesn't bring out everything that the other Gospels bring out in this account. And reading them all together helps a little bit. If you didn't get an opportunity to do that, it'd be good to do that. But the things, just a couple points as we wrap up. We know there was no justice that was being sought by the Jews. We know this because they're doing it under the cover of night. And even at this point before Pilate, it's just daybreak when he's with Pilate. So from the point of finishing the prayer in John 17 to the point of them saying, let Barabbas go, not Jesus, we're probably talking, 5 hours maybe have passed in this period of time. So there's no justice they were looking for. They were looking for some way to put him to death and get rid of him. And we saw earlier, when this happened, when he raised Lazarus from the dead, there was a point of saying, we got to get rid of this guy. He's gonna overthrow all the things that we have, right? Our power will be gone. We need to figure out how to dispatch him. So as they started making these plans, and that ramped up really quick as we've gone through the last 4 or 5 chapters, not much time has passed in those 4 or 5 chapters that we've just captured through here. We see the denial of Peter as Christ had told him he would, even though immediately before that denial he had his sword out. So we see how his apostles were scattered, how now he was alone. Even though John and Peter were following somewhat behind, they were in the vicinity, but he was now alone. He's been before this, you want to call it trial, before Annas and before Caiaphas, neither of which were looking to discover the truth, just looking for something they could pin on him so that they could try him for something, even asking him to self-incriminate himself so they'd have something to put before him. We have a couple minutes left. If anybody had anything else on this chapter, which is a pretty fast chapter as we go through it.
We talked about faith with Peter. I think his denial shortly after saying he would die
struggle in the same situation, so we got to be humble in thinking about it. But that his situation is a negative example of how faith should have acted versus how it did anyway. It's obvious that the lack of knowledge of the full truth led to him not being able to stand up for what he said he would stand up for. Because, like you said, his world was just shook by the fact that Jesus is just letting this happen. His kingdom is not from this world, like he was thinking. But he still believed in Jesus, and what he did against his own conscience. And he had a guilty conscience after doing it. And it shows that faith, while it's strengthened through revelation, if you have faith within whatever revelation you have, you've got to hold to it. So I should still serve God, knowing he's God and what I'm doing is right because he said it, even if I can't fully explain what I don't know yet. And so even a babe in Christ has the measure of faith they need to do incredible things for the Lord, though they're going to know a lot more and understand it more and be able to reason with it more later on in their life. If you have faith as a mustard seed, Jesus said, you can move mountains. And so faith is dependent on revelation, but if you have enough revelation to have any faith at all, you got to hold on to that. You can't do what Peter did.
And there's obviously we could have taken this chapter and focused solely on the denial of Peter and drawn a lot of things, but to get through it, there we are. So there you go. If you're lacking for sermons, there's one for you. All right. Thank you very much.